Hello, everyone. There are 92 days until the midterm elections. That's right. We've got 3 months to save our democracy, and we want to win, so we can't play the game we wish for. No more wishing. We got to play the game we're in, which is why we're here. I'm Maya May. With me is Senior LP Advisor, Elections Expert, the indubitable Trygve Olson. Hello, Trygve.
Indubitable?
Indubitable.
Those are some big words. I'm just a simple guy from Wisconsin. We never even had that vocabulary. I'm not quite, you're using your Chicago ways on me to try and confuse me.
I want to butter you up because you've got all the knowledge that we need in order to actually come out of this with our democracy intact. So I'm going to call you the indubitable, the illustrious, the amazingly knowledgeable Trygve Olson. We're here. Let's talk about the game we're in. Tonight, we're headed to Northland, Minnesota. And yes, your neck of the woods, Wisconsin, holy buckets. This is a huge show, y'all. There's a lot of candidates. We have an election denier, as per usual, an ivermectin fan, a guy who calls Social Security a Ponzi scheme, a candidate who claimed Listerine was a sound treatment for COVID, and also a bunch of people who aren't Ron Johnson. So get your hot dish ready. Before we get to Wisconsin, I'm going to say it like that, Wisconsin.
The Flatlander.
Whatever. I want to ask you, Trygve, about the Arizona governor and secretary of state races, because it's a big deal. Can you explain to everybody what's going on here?
A whole lot of crazies going on, I think. Lots of crazy.
It's too much.
You know what the thing is that so there was this whole theory that you could have the permanent governing coalition without the insanity if you just got rid of Trump. And what's happening here is the insanity is a virus that just keeps taking and taking and taking. You don't get the coalition without the insanity. The insanity is the coalition. So we saw that with Kari Lake. And Maya, did you catch on election night when she was behind? She was busy saying the whole thing's rigged.
Exactly.
And then boom. No, this is the greatest election since Cicero was elected in
totally
27 BC, or whenever the hell Cicero ran.
Yes. Now I think it's Trumpenstein's bride or something like that. Now she is I guess she believes in that election and that election.
But she is a shit sandwich in a lot prettier package, right? Oh. I did say when Doug Mastriano won, we were going to get the same shit sandwich and they were just going to wrap it up in pretty wrappers. And look at what Doug Ducey and the RGA did, right?
Yeah.
Doug Ducey trashed the daylights out of her because he was backing Robson. He knows Robson was the sane, traditional Republican in the race. He said as much. And here's another, and I think Doug Ducey's a good guy. He did the right thing when Trump was in office. He's a business Republican. You might not agree with him on policy, but there's no doubt that he's a small D Democrat. And the reality is he is prostituting himself, constricting himself now, saying backing Kari Lake. They're up on the air already. It's nuts. And that's the game we're in.
The game of crazies.
We know. Yeah, the game of crazies. And Kari Lake, she's a whole different level of crazy. But, the reality is even more than that. You have a attorney general's race in Fitcham who won, who is basically saying, he's going to, whoever he thinks wins the election, not what happened at the ballot box.
You say that so casually. Whoever wins the election wins the election. What does that mean for our democracy? Because this is one of our big states.
Well,
if this guy decides.
Yeah, and for those who may have seen on the Lincoln Project's Twitter feed, we have been rating races based on how important they are to democracy, right? Mm-hmm. And we've had up to this point 3 races, the governor's races in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which we have said are existential threats to democracy if the candidates running on the Republican side win. We upped the rating of Arizona to 20 this past week.
That's huge.
we now view, in terms of the existential threats, the races where if the Katie Hobbs doesn't win, if Tony Evers doesn't win, if Whitmer doesn't win, and if Shapiro don't win, you're going to have people who cannot be trusted to honor the presidential election. And when you can't have an election where the outcome of the election doesn't matter, that people don't have faith in.
Well, yeah,
democracies fall apart at that point.
More, it's not even trust that they're going to do the right thing or not do the right thing. We know they're not going to do the right thing because they're telling us over and over again that they're not going to respect the results unless. Go ahead, Trygve.
No, so I'm going to tell you a story. So years ago, maybe 98, 99, I was asked, I was doing some work for an organization led by Senator John McCain, the International Republican Institute. I got asked to go to Nigeria to help. They wanted people to go around to all the states in Nigeria and work with the parties. They were going to have their first elections in years. And the cycle Nigeria was in at the time, they would have an election. Those who lost, they had three main parties. The two parties that lost would accept the party that won for a little bit. Then they decide they wouldn't. They would rise up. Eventually, the military would step in. They'd have a military dictatorship. I was in this part of Nigeria that had horrible civil war, meeting with the three-party leaders, and the one who had battle scars from previous civil wars said to me, you know, the thing you have to understand, Trygve, about elections here in Nigeria is they're not decided by the people who win. They're decided by, are the people who lose, are they going to be willing to accept being governed by those who win?
That's terrible.
And I have thought about that forever, because at its heart, that guy in a very rural part of Nigeria hit the nail on the head with what democracy is really about. Mm-hmm. It's about having the faith in each other that if you lose, you consent to be governed by people who you didn't support, knowing that you're going to have elections in the future. Well, that goes out the door if you have people who are unwilling to honor the election, that basically just say, we don't care who wins. My side's going to win, and I'm going to decide it. And that's in essence what, I was for a Secretary of State's candidate. We've raised that in Arizona. We've raised that race up to 19.
Yeah. And remember, if it's 17 plus, it's mission critical. So if it's 19 and 20, we're talking about like
existential threats.
The sirens are a blaring. So let's get to Wisconsin. That's your home state. My first question: cheese curds or squeaky cheese?
No, you know what? You want your cheese curd squeaky. And I get that, you're from the big city down south. So all you do is want to invade us during the summer months, because who would really want to stay in Illinois? Well, actually, who would want to stay in Illinois, period. But so there's that, because your football team's no good. Good for us, though. But yeah, you want your cheese curd squeaky. Although squeaky cheese, it doesn't really matter as long as you're washing either down with either Bloody Marys in the morning, although you'd like your squeaky cheese or your cheese curds in your Bloody Mary, or either Leinenkugel's or Spotted Cow beer.
I'm going to say all the good craft beer actually comes from Chicago, Goose Island 312. Just saying. So
yeah, well, I know you're the kind of people who would drink
fancy craft beer.
Fancy beer, not real people beer. But anyway, on to the
real stuff.
Yeah, we digressed long enough.
We have the incumbent Tony Evers on a ticket for governor. He's former teacher, principal, school superintendent, like a good dude. And on the Republican side, there's a battle between a guy who said he'd need to see the evidence before he could decide whether the 2020 elections were rigged, and a woman some have described as radioactive. What's going on in this primary?
Yeah, so it's funny when you describe Tony Evers. He's kind of the epitome of a citizen legislator. He's a teacher who ended up becoming a principal, who ended up becoming superintendent of public schools, and he's kind of just a citizen legislature guy. Maybe he's not a polished politician, but So you got Tim Michaels. So it's a real interesting battle that's kind of developing here, because you have to understand that Wisconsin's Republican politics really has two camps. You got the Tommy Thompson camp, which is what I come out of from long ago, and then you got the Scott Walker camp. You know, Tommy Thompson governed trying to big tent. Scott Walker is a guy who is like, I'm going to try and mobilize the base. Glee Fleisch is the Walker candidate at the end of the day. Michaels was backed by Thompson, but he also went in hard to get Donald Trump's nomination, which, you know, so you now have Glee Fleisch, who is Pence's candidate, running as kind of, I don't want to say she's running as a traditional conservative. She's a little bit of an evangelical conservative, but she's trying to be a Trump conservative. Then you got Michaels, who's refusing to say what he's doing. He's now started attacking Glee Fleisch on TV. So you've got, it's really getting nasty between the two of them.
Now, do the good people of Wisconsin see that, though? Because I would think, like, that would be better. Nobody wants that nastiness.
I think, yes. I would say that Wisconsin is going to be really close, both the Ron Johnson race and this race. Trump is weighing in a lot in the state. It's all going to come down, really, and you know, it's one of the states where Lincoln Project's going to be really active, and we're getting resources to try and be active in the state. It's really going to come down to, you know, suburban Republican women, the same Bannon lines that were critical in 2020. And in 2020, you know, on election night, we were all in Park City, and people were coming up to me saying, "Are you sure Biden's going to win Wisconsin?" And we had spent a lot of money in Wisconsin, focusing on people in suburban Milwaukee, focusing on suburbs of Madison, focusing on the suburbs up north where I'm from, along the Minnesota border. Evers is going to have to run strong there to win. You know, I think.
Well, actually, and we haven't.
He has an opportunity. We should watch the ad, and we can talk a little bit about what he's trying to do, because I think it's good.
Let's roll that.
We've been through a lot in the last few years. We've been down, we've risen, we've hurt, we've healed. And through it all, we've not lost our courage or our hope. And while there's work to do, our governor is determined to do what's right for us. Tony Evers invested over $1 billion to help thousands of small businesses prevent layoffs and create jobs. To battle rising costs, our governor worked with Republicans and Democrats to pass middle-class income tax relief. Tony Evers fixed our roads, and our public schools are now in the top 10 in America. Today, Wisconsin has one of the lowest unemployment rates in our history, along with billions in budget surplus.
Folks, there's too much division in politics today. That's why I'm focused on bringing people together to get the results that matter.
Tony Evers. He's doing the right thing for Wisconsin.
I believe him.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what he's trying to do there, and if you know, for those who listened to Timmer and I on the podcast recently, we talked a lot about Gretchen Whitmer and how she's tried to govern much more traditionally the way that like Republicans governed in the 90s. You know, Tommy Thompson, John Engler, Tom Ridge. You know, they were consistent on their principles that they had, but they also tried to work in the middle to find solutions, right? So, and that's how they built those majorities. And then with time, you know, those majorities became something else. But the reality is that Whitmer has really focused her campaign on that. And the Evers campaign now seems to be doing the same thing, which is they're running to the center. They're not, you know, they're not backing down on things like choice, right? But they're running in terms of their ads and in terms of what they're doing to try and attract those voters who really are looking at the Republicans, who are so angry, and then in a lot of cases, in some cases, flat out nuts. You know, some of their candidates, and so it's a really solid ad. and it's good that Evers is trying to do that, because he's going to contrast himself with how Ron Johnson is running. Although we will see Ron Johnson is trying to pivot a little bit to the middle too.
It's going to be tough to do that now because the internet exists, and so do clips of him, even perhaps being handed electors, false electors, things like that.
Wow.
So I'm hoping he can't find his way back to the middle. I'm glad you actually brought up the issue of choice. We're going to talk about Kansas later in the show, because I do think that is going to have an effect on the suburban women. At least that's what we are seeing. But your prediction for the general, will he survive? Will Evers survive?
It's hard to say. It's going to be a close race. It's Wisconsin. I think, if you look at the 4 existential races, they're all governor's races. Now we have 4 with Arizona. I think Whitmer is running a really strong campaign. I think Shapiro and Evers, we'll see who Evers gets as an opponent, but Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Arizona, they're not done. They're not going to be done until they're declared the winners. But Tony Evers should win that race if they run a good race. He really should. And, if Tony Evers wins by a couple of points, it's a pretty good chance that the Senate race tips too.
Speaking of,
that Mandela Barnes beats Johnson, although Barnes has run much more as an unapologetic liberal, while Evers is running to the center. I think Evers is a better strategy, but I don't think Barnes can change who he is.
Yeah, I think after people are seeing some of the craziness, people are very much ready for sanity, and they're seeing Biden and Congress actually kind of getting things done. And so I'm hoping people are going to go, oh, this is what normalcy creates, is actual progress, economic progress for everyone. Talking about the Senate race real quick. Ron Johnson makes a frequent appearance in the Lincoln Project ads, QAnon, as we like to call him. He's the incumbent here. We have one of his ads. Can we pull that?
The latest mass murder in America didn't involve guns. 53 people, including 5 children, were murdered by human traffickers because Joe Biden's open border policy is facilitating the multi-billion-dollar business model of some of the most evil people on the planet. Human, sex, and drug trafficking are out of control because of Democrat governance. They have to be stopped. I'm Ron Johnson, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Ron Johnson for Senate, Inc.
Now, is this the ad he ended up not being able to run? He didn't want people to see. I believe
that's the ad that they refused to. Yeah.
Because
I don't know what to say exactly about what that says about whatever talk radio audience was listening to that. There's a whole element, so Ron Johnson has typically run his campaigns with a whole lot of crazy to the base, but television ads in Milwaukee and to a degree outstate, with 1 or 2 issues that make him look more moderate. And this time, the issue that he seems to be using is marriage equality. He's been negotiating with Tammy Baldwin, who's was the first openly lesbian member of Congress. And Tammy Baldwin, I'll tell you, I knew Tammy Baldwin when she was in the state legislature, and I was working in Wisconsin state legislature as well. Just a fantastic human being, just such a wonderful person. And the contrast with her, with Ron Johnson, is just stunning. But just as human beings. But Ron Johnson he's trying to use that as I'm not, and he even backed off on abortion a little bit. Well, I would never want women to be prosecuted to go to Illinois for an abortion. I would never be against, birth control. So Ron Johnson is trying to throw out these red herrings, if you will, to try and. So, and Mandela Barnes has decided that he is going to run as a progressive, an unapologetic progressive. And so it's going to be a strange race. You know, you got Tony Evers running to the center. And in the Senate race, you've got two people who are running unapologetically. We are what we are.
Which, I mean, and you've said in many races, like the top of the ticket in the state sets the tone for everything down ticket. So is this race different? Like, how do you see this playing out with everybody?
If Evers loses, I would say if Evers loses, Ron Johnson wins for sure.
Okay.
I could see a scenario where Evers wins and Johnson wins. I can't see a scenario where the Republican wins the governorship and Barnes wins the Senate.
Got it.
And, you know, they're going to be close.
Nail biters.
Be close. Yeah. I mean, I think Evers could end up winning by 2 or 3 points, in which case Barnes probably wins. But you could also have a very, very close race. Yeah.
Okay.
And right now it's a close race.
So, and to add to another twist, can we talk about the Senate general? Because that's really where we're.
Yeah. So Barnes cleared the field. I mean, it was becoming clear that Barnes had, you know, locked down the progressive base in Dane County, and he had locked up the African-American community in Milwaukee, and no one was going to beat him. And so Sarah Godlewski, who's the treasurer, who's from outstate, was the last one to get out of the race. And, you know, Barnes got a bunch of endorsements from Bernie Sanders and AOC, and a bunch of these people backed him. And so he cleared the field, and we'll see. I mean, the progressive wing of the Democrat Party got their candidate in Barnes to run against Ron Johnson, who certainly is the QAnon side of the Republican Party. So, you know.
And speaking of endorsements, Trump is endorsing somebody in Wisconsin as well, Andrew Steen, who's running a primary against the Wisconsin Assembly Speaker. So Trump's got a little tiny hands in this race as well. Mm-hmm. Why? Why is it so important to him to get that?
Yes. So Robin Voss kind of went, and in the interest of full disclosure, Robin and I have been friends since we've known each other since high school, and I consider Robin a friend. Robin went, you know, Robin knows the truth about the election, but ended up appointing this guy, Michael Gableman, a former Supreme Court justice, who's gone all in on the election was stolen, just crazy stuff. Trump has continued to pressure Voss. Voss had an interview recently where he said Trump's been calling him and basically said, hey, now that the Wisconsin Supreme Court's ruled that drop boxes are illegal, you can overturn the electors and recall your electors. And Robin Voss apparently told him, well, that's not a thing. It doesn't happen. So Trump's got an opponent, Andrew Steen. He literally, Trump endorsed him. Gableman was hanging out with him. You know, like Robin is the classic example of somebody who's tried to appease Trump. It's the whole, you know, there's this whole vein within the Republican Party that thought a strategy of we can have the governing coalition without the insanity, not realizing the insanity is the coalition. And so in trying to manage it, you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. And like Rusty Bowers, you know, Robin Voss might very well pay for it with his seat, which is, you know, a lot of the Wisconsin Democrats who are listening to this probably don't like Robin very much, but as a person, you know, Robin's a good guy. You know, he's got real problems, and, you know, Steen is an election denier.
And it's the thing. It's like you can't play around with fascism. So I feel like we have these candidates who are trying to toe the line, just hopefully not going to work out. Hopefully we'll definitely work against them because these are critical races. We need to move on. Looking at Minnesota, I'm going to use my Minnesota accent, Vikings territory. It's the state that gave us Paul Wellstone, but also Michelle Bachmann, if y'all remember. Moderate Democrat Tim Walz is a familiar face in Minnesota politics. He is the incumbent, and he also served as a U.S. representative for Minnesota House District 1. Can you tell us about Tim?
You know what Minnesota's never given us, Maya? the Super Bowl champion.
I knew it was coming.
All you Viking fans, go ahead, have at me on Twitter. We have 4 of them in Green Bay. You don't have to stand in line so long to look at them. So yeah, Tim Walz. So that race is proving to be closer than people thought. And I will tell you, so in presidential elections, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona have been kind of the key states. Nevada, they're the swing states, right? Minnesota is getting close to being that. And Walz there's a divide in the Democrat Party in Minnesota between sort of the Ilhan Omar left, progressive left, and the traditional Humphrey Mondale type of Democrats. Now, those guys, Hubert Humphrey was a big liberal icon, but now they're sort of like, there's this whole thing that's going on, and Walz has got problems within his base because of what went down post George Floyd and how that unfolded. Like, he couldn't do enough for the progressive wing of the abolish the police folks in Hennepin County. And on the other side of the equation, right, he's never going to make the MAGA wing Republicans happy. And so he's running against a guy, Jensen, and Walz has got a real race on his hands. It is, and if that race gets closer, that's a big deal, because Minnesota, as we move into the 2024 presidential, is going to look a lot more like Wisconsin and Michigan, and purplish than I think people realize. And so, should Walz win? Yes, he should. Minnesota still is a blue leaning state, but Walz is having a little bit of a harder time than expected. Jensen, who he's running against, is really conservative. Really conservative.
Okay. And so, but that race is rated a 16. So would you, and you say it still sits?
We're watching it. People who want more on that, if you go to the second episode of Jeff Timmer and I talking all the races across the country, we get pretty deep in the weeds on Minnesota in terms of that race. But yeah, it's rated 16 for now. That's because we still give Walz a little bit of an advantage. It isn't, and we rate based on how important is it to democracy, but it could go up, and it certainly is a race that Democrats, need to be watching closely. And if you're in Minnesota, you need to get active for Tim Walz.
And the Republican candidates, are they running close to center on this? Like, especially, post what they saw in Kansas, do you see any shifting there?
Maybe a little bit. Minnesota is becoming a lot like, there's some rural parts of Minnesota that have really become red. Trump ignited those. It's going to come down to the Twin Cities suburbs. And the Twin Cities suburbs, people are kind of pinched because, they're pinched between the Hennepin County crew that wants to abolish the police and the MAGA folks outstate. They're looking for some common sense. I think ultimately Walz will be able to demonstrate himself as a common sense candidate. I don't think he ends up losing the progressive wing, but he's got the real balancing act. And it's one of the things that people need to recognize, right? On the Democrat side, there's two wings. They're not illiberal. I'm not saying the progressive side is illiberal, but when you start talking about defunding abolishing the police, as happened in
Minnesota, in Minneapolis,
in Hennepin County, in Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, the mayor, he got run against people who abolished the police people. He ultimately prevailed, and that pivots into I think the next topic we're going to talk about.
Well, yeah, the Minnesota House 5 primary, you mentioned Omar already. This is the Democratic primary. She's being primaried. She's a nationally known member of the squad. Do you think she's going to win? Where do you think she's going to fall? Too progressive?
Hard to know what's going to happen in that primary, but she's got a real primary. I mean, Samuels, who's running against her, is the real deal. Don Samuels was on the county board. The city council. The big news out of that race, quite honestly, Maya, is that Jacob Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis, who was primaried by abolish the police people, and beat him back pretty good. He's endorsing Samuels.
Wow. Okay.
So Ilhan Omar may go down. I mean, that is a possibility. Samuels is trying to run much more as a traditional, liberal Democrat. Would he be part of the squad if he's elected? No. But would he be, he'd be
Progressive
Nancy
enough.
Pelosi liberal. He's pretty progressive.
Progressive enough.
But so yeah, she's got a real race.
Okay.
I don't know that she'll lose because it's hard to say. It's Democrat primary, low turnout in Hennepin County. But yeah, she's certainly, there's the potential she could go down, and he's the real deal.
Well, and it's, those candidates that are closer to center right now are kind of bringing people together. And, you mentioned like this trend of these states that were once, red going purple, and we're seeing a lot of that. And so we have to talk about last week before we go, because the biggest story that came out of it, we talked about it up top, Kansas. Voters there not only rejected a constitutional amendment banning abortion, they did it overwhelmingly. And so there's been a lot of prognosticating since then. So I want to ask you to add more. Is there a sign of hope for the midterms when we're talking turnout, when we're talking excitement about these candidates?
Yeah, I mean, I think when the question is put to voters, do you want to have people ban abortion under all circumstances? People are going to say no. Now, does that mean they want abortion under all circumstances? Maybe not. Some, but not all. But that's really, in Kansas, Kansas is a red state, and you saw women overwhelmingly register post-Roe. There are other places where the Republicans have been talking about putting this thing on the ballot. They're now a little bit backing off on that. I think on the whole thing, here's the thing. If this is just my personal opinion, but if it's questioned, there are multiple ways that issue can be addressed that aren't abortion on demand under any circumstances versus no abortions under any circumstances. The thing is, where elements of the conservative side have gone is basically no abortions under any circumstances. And when that gets out there, there's a lot of Republicans who are going to move off that. Republican women,
I mean, the polling's showing that it is for sure. And so that to me gives me hope, and I'm hoping Democrats really nail them on this over and over and over again going into the midterms. So, but Kansas wasn't the only thing going on. Michigan, which we've talked about extensively with Whitmer, Washington State also had House primaries. Anything that we missed there that you want to fill us in on?
Looks like only Newhouse is the only one of the guys who voted for impeachment that's going to get through. Liz Cheney, we'll see. Yeah, wasn't a good night for those who voted. It gets back to what I said earlier. The insanity infects everything.
Mm-hmm.
There is no permanent governing coalition without the insanity. The insanity is what you'll get.
Yeah, that's what I'm feeling. And in Michigan, real quick, Whitmer is going to be facing Tudor Dixon. Is that who?
Yeah, vampire porn star Tudor Dixon. I don't know. Again, it's in some cases it's incremental, in some cases it's big. Tudor Dixon, they're trying to say, well, it could have been worse. Well, yeah, that might be the case, but she's got problems too. She's on tape saying if a 10-year-old got pregnant, she'd try to talk her out of an abortion and she shouldn't be allowed to have one. So yeah, I mean, because she's not your boy Kelly with the dimples.
Doesn't have dimples going for her.
Tudor Dixon. At the end of the day, I just think Whitmer's running a smart campaign. Tudor Dixon is going to struggle. And Kelly, your dimple boy, isn't conceding. I don't know if you saw that, but he's saying that it was rigged against him, because that's what they all do now, and that's the precedent that gets set, right?
Well, and that just goes back to your story about Nigeria, because if they're
Absolutely.
not willing to concede, if they're not, I mean, that's the game that they're playing, and
yes,
we have to figure out how to play that.
Zero sum.
Yes, and I think
I win or else.
Yeah, which I mean, and you brought up Liz Cheney. If she loses her primary, because like it's crazy to me that somebody who's like truly a patriot, who's truly putting country before party, is even being primary. But obviously, we know Trump had a hand in that. And I hate to say it does look likely. Like, how does that play out if she, like, what happens to the January 6th committee if she ends up losing her primary?
Nothing. I mean, the January 6th committee will continue going through the end of the year, and I assume they'll try and have it wrapped up by the end of the year, because they know that there's a decent chance that Republicans take over the House and they kill it anyway. I honestly haven't ever talked to Liz Cheney about it, but I get the sense, and she's made clear she's doing what's right, and if that means that she doesn't get to be the congresswoman from Wyoming, so be it. And that's what it's supposed to be about, right? Like, she's putting oath and country ahead of politics and partisanship and personal gain. And there's a great story that ran yesterday or the day before, because Mike Enzi, who's a former senator from Wyoming, died. All these Republican senators are out there for his funeral, and Liz is there, and they're all coming up to Liz apparently behind the scenes saying, "Oh, we're so glad you're doing what you're doing." I mean, Christ.
Have the bravery.
It's got to get old. I mean, honestly, go jump on the foxhole. Go jump on the machine gun nest. I'm right here in the foxhole behind you.
Yeah.
Right?
No, yeah. I mean, that probably just convinces her more and more of the need to do the work that she is doing. So,
yeah. And I mean, did you see the Dick Cheney ad? I bet there were a lot of people who didn't like Dick Cheney back when he was on the Democrat side, who were like,
but I'm glad he put
Dick Cheney now. But,
yeah, I was gonna say, but I'm glad he put that ad out. It's like, if people come
powerful.
through and they need to come through, I think that ad is probably going to convince a lot of people who might have been on the fence about what's happening with Donald Trump and the committee and everything. So hopefully that does have an effect on these elections. But there's something that you all can do to have an effect, which is to vote, register to vote. Make sure your friends and family are registered to vote. But I'm going to actually ask you to take it a step further and register to become poll workers, because that is something that the illiberal side seems to be, even though they don't believe in elections, it seems they're being really diligent about making sure they have poll workers and poll watchers. And so we need to make sure that we have people who love democracy helping out at the polls, because it does make a huge difference. So the link is right up there. So please consider doing that. It's incredibly important for democracy, as is any work that you can do, volunteer work. You can join the union.us, and we will hook you up with opportunities to volunteer in your own community. Also, feel free to donate. You can donate to your local candidate, to any organization fighting autocracy, working to save our democracy, like the Lincoln Project. So we can do this. We've seen that the tides are changing. We've seen that Biden has pulled off some incredible legislation. And so I am feeling actually pretty optimistic about holding the House and Senate. Tell me you are too, Trygve, on our final parting words for this show.
I feel, the Senate is looking pretty good. The House is hard, but yeah, maybe. I mean, those governor's races, that's huge. Senate, this is a decent chance.
All right. Decent. I guess I'll have to be
honestly,
with decent, Trygve.
It's like asking a football coach about a game, right? When you spend as much time running campaigns as I do, you're just sort of like, probably. It's August, Maya. I don't know. Ask me a week out.
There's still October surprises to be had, all of that. But I'm going to say, I'm going to keep the faith, and I'm going to stay optimistic, and I'm going to fight this as if we are going to win, which means putting
We
it
need to
all
go out there
there.
and kick some ass. That's
Yes!
what we need to do.
That's what I need the coach to say. That's the Trygve that I need.
We all, regardless of where we stand on policy, need to go out and stand up for democracy. The
Yes.
bottom line is, whatever our disagreements are on policy, if you care about democracy, you got to stand together and fight. You got to fight and be on the side of Liz Cheney. You got to be on the side of, there's plenty of Democrats out there that I never thought that I would be saying I have to, that's where I'm going to be, because I don't agree with them a lot on policy. I'm still conservative, even if I'm not a Republican. But I understand Josh Shapiro has to win, because there isn't a normal person running against Josh Shapiro. There's a autocratic fascist Christian nationalist.
January 6th.
Who won't honor the election. He cannot be governor of Mastriano cannot be governor of Pennsylvania if we want to have democracy continue. So regardless of policy.
Yes. Yeah. So put the policy aside, y'all. We got to focus on what matters. That's what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that we are voting and that we are getting out there. So thank you, Trygve Olson. Thank you for your expertise. We will keep coming back until Election Day, but also don't forget to watch the breakdown tomorrow, Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, and Wednesday you can catch me and Lisa Senecal on We're Speaking. Do not miss it. You can follow me on Twitter at MyOnStage and Trygve at Trygve Olson, and we will see you again soon.